Marcus Johnson's morning started like any other Tuesday in downtown Seattle. The crisp autumn air nipped at his face as he adjusted his navy blue tie and checked his watch. 8:15 a.m. Perfect timing for his daily coffee run before heading to his office at the tech firm where he worked as a senior IT manager for the past 5 years. The local coffee shop, Bean and Brew, sat nestled between a bookstore and a vintage clothing boutique. The familiar scent of freshly ground coffee beans welcomed him as he pushed open the glass door. The coffee shop had fallen eerily quiet, save for the gentle hum of the espresso machines. Marcus remained rooted in his spot, keenly aware that every move he made would be scrutinized. The woman, who would later be identified as Karen Mitchell, continued to create a scene, her voice growing increasingly shrill. Everyone saw him. Karen announced to the coffee shop at large, though no one had seen anything of the sort. "He was trying to steal from my purse. I demand someone call the police right now." Sarah, the barista, had already pressed the silent alert button to notify her manager, while continuing to record the incident on her phone. She'd served Marcus every weekday morning for the past year and knew him to be one of their most polite and respectful customers. "Ma'am," Marcus spoke again, his voice remaining steady despite the tension coursing through his body. "There are security cameras in this establishment. I suggest we all take a moment to calm down and think about what you're accusing me of." Tom, the accountant with the bow tie, stepped forward from his spot near the counter. "I've been watching the whole time," he stated firmly. "This gentleman hasn't moved except to step forward in line. You're the one who bumped into him." Karen's face flushed deeper red, but instead of backing down, she doubled down on her accusations. "You're all just taking his side because you're afraid to speak up. I know what I felt, and I don't feel safe here." Marcus could feel his palms growing sweaty, but years of dealing with similar situations had taught him the importance of maintaining composure. He slowly reached into his suit pocket and pulled out his business card holder, a leather case with his company's logo embossed in gold. "My name is Marcus Johnson," he said clearly, holding up his corporate ID badge. "I'm the senior IT manager at Tech Vision Solutions down the street. I come here every morning before work, and I'm sure many people here can vouch for that." Several regular customers nodded in agreement. Maria, the dental hygienist, spoke up from her spot by the window. "He's right. I see him here almost every day. He's always professional and polite." Karen seemed momentarily thrown off balance by Marcus's calm demeanor and professional credentials, but she wasn't ready to back down. "Well, that doesn't prove anything," she sputtered. "Anyone can get a fake ID." Just then, the store manager, David Chen, emerged from the back office. He was a middle-aged Asian man who had owned the coffee shop for over a decade. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, though the multiple phones recording the scene told him plenty. Before Karen could launch into her accusations again, Marcus spoke up. "This lady seems to believe I attempted to steal from her purse, despite the fact that I've been standing still in line, checking my work emails." He pulled out his phone, showing the timestamp of his email activity. "I'd be happy to review the security footage to clear up any misunderstanding." David nodded, his expression serious. "We have multiple cameras covering this area, and I've already reviewed the last few minutes of footage on my office monitor. Mr. Johnson is a valued regular customer who has never caused any problems." The other customers had formed a loose circle around the scene, many still recording. Karen's accusations had backfired spectacularly, transforming her from accuser to accused. The evidence of her racial profiling was being documented from multiple angles. "I don't have to stand here and be ganged up on," Karen declared, her voice quavering slightly as she realized how many phones were pointed in her direction. "I know what I felt, and I'm going to report this establishment." Marcus maintained his dignified stance, straightening his tie as he addressed her one final time. "Ma'am, I understand you might have been startled or confused, but making false accusations against someone based on their appearance is not only morally wrong but can have serious consequences. I'd be happy to have a civil conversation about this if you're willing." The offer to engage in dialogue seemed to catch Karen off guard. She clutched her purse tighter, looking around at the disapproving faces surrounding her. For the first time since the confrontation began, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face as she realized her attempt to weaponize her prejudice had completely backfired. The morning sun streamed through the coffee shop's windows, illuminating the scene in a harsh clarity that made it impossible to deny what was really happening. The next few moments would determine whether this would escalate further or become a moment of potential learning and change. The tension in Bean and Brew had reached its peak. Karen Mitchell's false accusations hung in the air like the steam from the espresso machine, but the tide had clearly turned against her. The other customers, still recording on their phones, had formed a protective circle around Marcus, their morning coffee routine transformed into an impromptu stand against injustice. "I'm calling the police right now," Karen announced, fumbling in her purse for her phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to unlock it, mascara slightly smudged from her growing agitation. David Chen, the store manager, stepped forward calmly. "Ma'am, you're welcome to call the police. In fact, I encourage it. We can show them the security footage, and all these customers can serve as witnesses. However, you should know that making false police reports is a serious offense." Sarah, still recording from behind the counter, spoke up. "I've already sent the video to our corporate office. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind." Marcus remained perfectly still, his expression composed despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He'd been in similar situations before, but never with so many allies standing beside him. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, highlighting the stark contrast between Karen's increasingly disheveled appearance and his own immaculate presentation. "You don't understand." Karen's voice cracked slightly. "I'm a respected member of this community. I've been coming here for years. You can't treat me this way." "So have I," Marcus responded evenly. "And I believe the treatment you're receiving is a direct result of your own actions, not your status in the community. Would you like to explain to everyone why you felt threatened by me, despite having no evidence of wrongdoing?" The coffee shop had grown more crowded as curious passers-by peered through the windows, drawn by the commotion. Some had even entered the store, phones already recording, having heard raised voices from outside. Tom, the accountant, cleared his throat. "I've already uploaded my video to social media. The timestamp clearly shows everything that happened. Would you still like to call the police, ma'am?" Karen's phone slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. As she bent to retrieve it, her designer purse, the one she'd accused Marcus of trying to steal from, swung forward, spilling its contents across the floor. Without hesitation, Marcus knelt down to help gather her scattered belongings. This simple act of kindness seemed to break something in Karen. Tears welled up in her eyes as she watched him carefully collecting her lipstick, wallet, and car keys. I don't," she stammered, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. Her hand shook as she accepted her belongings from Marcus. Maria, the dental hygienist, stepped forward. "We all saw what happened here. You tried to create a dangerous situation for this man, based on nothing but prejudice. Do you realize you could have put his life at risk with false accusations?" The other customers murmured in agreement. Sarah had moved from behind the counter to stand closer to Marcus, her phone still recording. "Our regular customers are like family here," she said firmly. "And Mr. Johnson is one of our most valued customers." David Chen surveyed the scene before making his decision. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're no longer welcome in this establishment. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who creates an unsafe environment for our customers." Karen looked around desperately, searching for any sympathetic face in the crowd, but found none. The community she claimed to be a respected member of had unanimously sided with Marcus, their solidarity a powerful statement against her prejudice. "This isn't over," she muttered, but her words lacked conviction. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the ugliness of her prejudice for all to see. As she gathered her remaining dignity and headed toward the door, Marcus called out one last time. "Ma'am." She paused, her hand on the door handle. "I hope this experience leads to some self-reflection. Change is possible if you're willing to acknowledge the problem." The bell above the door chimed as Karen hurried out, leaving behind a coffee shop full of people who had witnessed both the worst and best of human nature in the span of a few minutes. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, but now it felt less harsh and more hopeful, illuminating a community that had chosen to stand together against injustice. In the moments following Karen's departure, the atmosphere in Bean and Brew began to shift. The tension that had filled the space gradually dissolved, replaced by a sense of collective relief and unity. Marcus, still standing in his original spot in line, found himself surrounded by supportive faces and words of encouragement. David Chen, the manager, approached Marcus with genuine concern. "Mr. Johnson, I want to apologize for what you experienced in our establishment today." Marcus shook his head gently. "That's not necessary, Mr. Chen. I appreciate the gesture, but I'd rather pay for my coffee like any other customer. What happened here today wasn't your fault or the fault of this business." Sarah, who had finally stopped recording, emerged from behind the counter with Marcus's usual order, a medium dark roast with a splash of almond milk. "I made this while everything was happening," she said, offering him the cup. "I figured you might need it even more than usual today." The other customers began sharing their videos with Marcus, ensuring he had copies for his records. Tom, the accountant, had already received numerous responses to his social media post. "It's going viral," he announced, showing Marcus his phone screen. "People are sharing it with comments about similar experiences they've had." Marcus took a thoughtful sip of his coffee, considering the implications of what had just transpired. "You know," he began, addressing the group that had gathered around him, "what happened here today is unfortunately not uncommon. What is uncommon is having so many people willing to stand up and speak out." Maria, still positioned near the window, nodded in agreement. "It's not enough to just not be racist," she said. "We have to be actively anti-racist. I'm just sorry you had to go through this at all." A young college student who had been quietly observing from the corner raised her hand slightly. "Mr. Johnson, the way you handled that situation was incredible. Would you consider speaking at our campus? We have a social justice group that discusses these exact issues." Before Marcus could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. Everyone turned, half expecting to see Karen returning, but instead, a police officer walked in. Apparently, despite her retreat, Karen had made good on her threat to call law enforcement. Officer James Rodriguez, a veteran of the force, surveyed the scene. "We received a call about a disturbance," he stated professionally. "Would someone like to fill me in?" David Chen immediately stepped forward with his tablet, showing the security footage. "We have everything recorded, officer. Multiple angles, in fact." The officer watched the footage carefully, his expression remaining neutral but attentive. Meanwhile, several customers approached him, offering their witness statements and video evidence from their phones. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor as he introduced himself to the officer. "I'm the alleged perpetrator in this situation," he said with a slight smile. "Though as you can see from the evidence, the only crime committed here was wasting your time with a false report." Officer Rodriguez nodded, finishing his review of the footage. "Unfortunately, we see these types of calls too often. Mr. Johnson, would you like to press charges for false reporting?" Marcus considered the question carefully, aware that everyone in the coffee shop was waiting for his response. "No," he finally said, "I don't believe punitive measures would address the root cause of what happened here. However, I would like this incident documented in case there's a pattern of similar behavior." The officer took detailed notes, collecting contact information from witnesses who were willing to provide statements. "You're handling this with remarkable grace," he commented to Marcus. "Not everyone would be so measured in their response." "Sometimes," Marcus replied, checking his watch and realizing he was now significantly late for work. "The best way to counter hatred is to demonstrate exactly why it's unfounded. Every interaction is an opportunity for education and change." As the officer finished taking statements, the coffee shop began to return to its normal rhythm. Customers who had witnessed the incident exchanged contact information with Marcus, many expressing their desire to stay in touch and support him if needed. David Chen approached Marcus one final time. "Your response to this situation was extraordinary. Would you consider having a conversation with our staff about how to handle similar incidents? We want to ensure we're doing everything we can to make this space safe and welcoming for everyone." Marcus glanced at his phone, seeing several missed calls from his office, but he knew some things were more important than being on time for work. This moment had the potential to create lasting change in his community, and he wasn't going to let that opportunity slip away. By early afternoon, the morning's incident at Bean and Brew had spread across social media like wildfire. Marcus sat in his office at Tech Vision Solutions, attempting to focus on his work while his phone continuously buzzed with notifications. The videos of his encounter with Karen had been shared thousands of times, sparking intense online discussions about racial profiling and community response. His team leader, Jennifer Walsh, knocked on his office door. "Marcus, have you seen the news? You're trending locally." She held up her tablet, showing him a headline from the city's leading news website. "Local tech executives' dignified response to racial profiling goes viral." Marcus leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie slightly. "I never wanted to become a viral sensation," he said, rubbing his temples. "I just wanted my morning coffee." "The CEO wants to see you," Jennifer informed him. "Don't worry, it's not about your late arrival. I explained everything." In the executive suite on the top floor, CEO Michael Patterson greeted Marcus with genuine concern. "I saw the videos, Marcus. The way you handled that situation reflects exactly why we need you in leadership positions here." Marcus settled into one of the plush chairs facing Patterson's desk. "I appreciate that, sir. Though I have to admit, it's overwhelming how much attention this is getting." "That's actually why I called you up here," Patterson said, sliding a document across his desk. "We've been working on our company's diversity and inclusion initiatives, and frankly, they need improvement. Would you consider heading up a new task force? This morning proved you have exactly the kind of leadership we need." While Marcus reviewed the proposal, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from David Chen at Bean and Brew. "Local news wants to interview you. They're calling it the Community Stands Together story. Also, Karen's daughter reached out to the shop. She wants to apologize in person." The afternoon continued to bring surprises. Local civil rights organizations called, requesting his participation in upcoming panels. 3 other companies in the area reached out through LinkedIn, asking if he would consult on their diversity training programs. Sarah from the coffee shop sent a message that touched him deeply. The morning crew took up a collection. "We're putting up a zero tolerance for discrimination sign and starting a monthly community dialogue series. Would you be our first speaker?" Around 3 p.m., Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Officer Rodriguez had returned, this time with additional information. "Mr. Johnson, we've done some background checking. It turns out Mrs. Mitchell has quite a history of similar complaints. Your case has encouraged other victims to come forward." Marcus processed this information thoughtfully. "Has anyone tried to reach out to her? Sometimes people act out of fear because they've never had to confront their own biases." "Actually," Officer Rodriguez replied, "that's part of why I'm here. The department is launching a community mediation program. We think your case could be a powerful example of how these situations can be handled constructively." As the workday went down, Marcus's inbox filled with interview requests from national news outlets. His phone showed missed calls from social justice organizations, educational institutions, and even a publishing agent interested in having him write about his experience. Jennifer poked her head in one last time before leaving. "Your story is inspiring people, Marcus. The company's social media is flooded with positive messages. People are sharing their own stories and how they wish they'd handled them with your composure." Marcus gathered his things, preparing to head home. The events of the day had exhausted him, but he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't expected. What had started as an ugly incident had transformed into an opportunity for genuine change. As he walked through the office lobby, the security guard, an elderly black man named Walter, stopped him. "Saw what happened this morning, son. Been working these doors for 30 years, seen plenty of Karens come and go. But the way you handled it, that's how we change minds. Not with anger, but with dignity." Marcus shook Walter's hand, understanding the deeper meaning in his words. The morning's confrontation had become more than just another incident of racial profiling. It had evolved into a catalyst for community action, a teaching moment that resonated far beyond the walls of a coffee shop. His phone buzzed one final time, a message from Tom, the accountant. "Community meeting this weekend at the coffee shop. Half the neighborhood wants to attend. Change is happening, my friend." The following morning, Marcus pulled into his usual parking spot near Bean and Brew, noticing something different. Through the coffee shop's windows, he could see a crowd gathered inside, far larger than the usual morning rush. As he approached the door, he realized why. Karen Mitchell stood inside with a younger woman who bore a striking resemblance to her daughter Emma. They were speaking with David Chen, and the conversation appeared tense but civil. Several regular customers, including Tom and Maria, watched from nearby tables while Sarah worked behind the counter, stealing occasional glances at the scene. Marcus posed outside, taking a deep breath. He hadn't expected to see Karen again so soon, if ever. But before he could decide whether to enter or find another coffee shop for the morning, Emma spotted him through the window and hurried outside. "Mr. Johnson," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, I know you have every reason to walk away, but would you be willing to talk with us? My mother has something she needs to say." Inside the coffee shop, Karen looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than she had the day before. Her perfectly styled hair and designer clothes couldn't hide her discomfort as Marcus entered. The other customers fell silent, watching intently. "Mr. Johnson," Karen began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My daughter showed me all the videos. She made me watch them several times." She paused, struggling to maintain eye contact. "I saw myself as others saw me, and I didn't recognize that person." Emma stepped forward, standing supportively beside her mother. "Mom spent the night at my house. We talked for hours about why she reacted the way she did. About her fears, her prejudices, and where they came from. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." David Chen quietly arranged a private table in the corner, away from curious onlookers. Marcus sat down with Karen and Emma, while Sarah brought over 3 cups of coffee. "On the house," she insisted. "Yesterday," Karen continued, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup, "my grandson asked me why everyone was calling his grandmother racist on social media. He's 7. I had to try to explain to him what I'd done and why it was wrong. I couldn't sleep after that." Marcus listened silently, noting the genuine distress in her voice. The woman sitting before him was dramatically different from the one who had accused him just 24 hours ago. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, Karen explained. "I've seen it change, and instead of embracing that change, I let fear guide my actions. Yesterday, you showed me more dignity than I deserved, and I am deeply, truly sorry." Emma pulled out some papers from her bag. "Mom and I spent the morning signing her up for diversity and inclusion workshops at the community center. She's also volunteered to share her story at anti-bias training sessions. We know it's just a start, but..." "It's a significant start," Marcus said, speaking for the first time. "Change begins with acknowledging our mistakes and being willing to learn from them." The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Other customers occasionally stopped by their table, some sharing their own stories of prejudice and growth. Tom brought over fresh coffee, and Maria rescheduled her morning patients to stay and participate in the discussion. By the time Marcus needed to leave for work, something remarkable had happened. The coffee shop had transformed into an impromptu forum for honest dialogue about race, prejudice, and the possibility of change. David Chen announced that Bean and Brew would host regular community conversations, with the first one featuring both Marcus and Karen sharing their perspectives on the incident and its aftermath. As Marcus gathered his things to leave, Karen reached out hesitantly. "Would you be willing to meet with my grandson? He has questions that I think would be better answered by you than by me." Marcus checked his calendar on his phone. "I can do Saturday morning, right here at the coffee shop. Bring him by, and we can talk about what happened and why it matters." Emma hugged her mother, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. You're teaching us all how to be better people." As Marcus finally headed to work, significantly late for the second day in a row, he realized that sometimes the most important changes start with a simple cup of coffee and the willingness to see humanity in everyone, even those who initially failed to see it in others. The weekend arrived swiftly, and Bean and Brew had been transformed. David Chen and his staff had rearranged the furniture to create a community gathering space. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, and a small podium stood at the front. The usual morning rush had given way to something more meaningful. Marcus arrived early, dressed casually in jeans and a navy sweater rather than his usual business suit. He found Karen already there with her grandson, Tommy, a bright-eyed 7-year-old who clutched a handmade card in his small hands. "I made this for you," Tommy said, holding out the card decorated with colorful markers. "Mom helped me write, 'I'm sorry my grandma was mean. You're nice.'" The simple honesty of a child's words carried more weight than any adult apology. The coffee shop began filling up with familiar faces and new ones. Tom and Maria were there, along with Sarah and the entire morning crew. Local community leaders, teachers, and families streamed in, drawn by the story that had now reached national news outlets. Emma Mitchell, who had organized the event with David Chen, stepped up to the podium. "We're here today not just to talk about what happened, but to learn from it. This isn't about shame or blame. It's about growth and understanding." Marcus took his turn at the podium, looking out at the diverse crowd that filled every corner of the coffee shop. "What happened here wasn't just about one incident or one person," he began. "It's about the choices we make every day and how we see and treat each other." Karen stood next, her voice stronger than it had been days before. "I was wrong," she stated simply. "But being wrong doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of something better." Throughout the morning, people shared their own experiences. A high school teacher described how she used the viral video in her social studies class. An elderly man admitted to his own prejudices and his journey to overcome them. Young parents discussed how they talked to their children about race and respect. Tommy, who had been listening intently, raised his hand. "Can I say something?" he asked. When given the podium, with a step stool to reach the microphone, he looked directly at Marcus. "My grandma's different now. She says everyone deserves respect. She's learning, just like me in school." The simplicity of Tommy's words brought tears to many eyes. Karen hugged her grandson, while Emma documented the moment for what would become part of a larger community education project. David Chen announced that Bean and Brew would institute monthly community dialogue sessions. "What happened here last week showed us that our coffee shop isn't just a business. It's a place where community happens, where change is possible." Local businesses began pledging support. The bookstore next door offered to create a reading corner with books about diversity and inclusion. The tech company where Marcus worked announced a mentorship program for minority students interested in STEM careers. As the formal part of the meeting concluded, people mingled over coffee and pastries. Marcus found himself in conversation with a group of young professionals who asked about his journey and how he maintained composure in difficult situations. "It's not about being perfect," he explained. "It's about being willing to have difficult conversations and believing that people can change." Tommy tugged at Marcus's sleeve. "Will you come to my school? My teacher says we need to learn about this stuff early." Before Marcus could respond, Karen joined them. "Only if your parents and teacher agree," she said, then turned to Marcus. "Though I think it's a wonderful idea. Children might be our best hope for real change." Sarah, who had been taking photos throughout the event, showed Marcus her phone. The local news had picked up the story of the community meeting, highlighting it as an example of how confrontation could lead to conversation and genuine change. As the gathering wound down, David Chen unveiled a new plaque near the entrance. It read, "Bean and Brew, where community grows. All are welcome here." Below it hung a framed photo of the diverse group gathered that morning, a testament to the power of turning a negative incident into a positive force for change. Marcus looked around at the faces of people who had become more than just fellow coffee shop customers. They had become partners in creating meaningful change. Sometimes, he realized, the worst moments can bring out the best in a community if people are willing to learn, grow, and stand together. 3 months after the incident that changed Bean and Brew forever, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at the local high school. The coffee shop's community initiative had grown far beyond anyone's expectations, touching lives throughout the city and beyond. On this particular evening, he shared the stage with Karen Mitchell. They had been invited to speak to parents, teachers, and students about their experience and its lasting impact. The audience listened intently as they took turns describing how a confrontation over coffee had transformed into a movement for positive change. Sometimes, Marcus explained, adjusting the microphone, the most powerful lessons come from our most uncomfortable moments. 3 months ago, I was just a man trying to get his morning coffee. Today, I'm part of something much bigger. Karen stepped forward, her confidence grown over the months of speaking engagements and community work. "And I was someone who let fear and prejudice guide my actions. But thanks to Mr. Johnson's dignity and our community's response, I learned that it's never too late to change." In the front row, Tommy sat between his mother Emma and his teacher, beaming with pride. His class had just completed a project on community unity, inspired by the events at Bean and Brew. Their artwork decorated the school hallways, carrying messages of acceptance and understanding. Bean and Brew itself had been transformed. David Chen had expanded the space, adding a community room where weekly discussions and workshops were held. The Wall of Change, as customers called it, displayed photographs and stories of people coming together across cultural and social divides. Sarah, now promoted to assistant manager, had started a youth program teaching high school students about customer service and community relations. Tom and Maria had become regular speakers at these sessions, sharing their perspectives on standing up against discrimination. The local business association had taken notice. They awarded Bean and Brew Business of the Year for its contribution to community development. Other coffee shops in the city began implementing similar programs, creating a network of safe spaces for difficult but necessary conversations. Marcus's technology company had also evolved. Inspired by his handling of the situation, they had developed a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program that was being adopted by other firms in the industry. Young professionals regularly sought his mentorship, eager to learn how to navigate challenging situations with grace and wisdom. As the evening's presentation concluded, a student raised her hand. "Do you two consider yourselves friends now?" she asked, looking between Marcus and Karen. The audience fell silent, awaiting their response. Marcus smiled thoughtfully before answering. "We're something more important than friends," he said. "We're proof that change is possible when people are willing to learn from their mistakes and when communities stand together against injustice." Karen nodded in agreement. "Every morning, I still get my coffee at Bean and Brew. But now, instead of seeing differences to fear, I see opportunities to connect and learn." After the presentation, they gathered at the coffee shop for a small celebration. David Chen had kept it open late specially for the occasion. Tommy proudly showed Marcus his latest school project, a story about his grandmother's transformation that had earned him top marks. "You know," Emma said, watching her son, "what happened that day could have gone so differently. It could have ended with anger and divisions. Instead, it brought our community together in ways we never expected." The wall-mounted television in the coffee shop showed a news report about similar initiatives spreading to other cities. The Bean and Brew model, as they called it, was being studied as an example of how communities could turn confrontation into conversation. As the evening wound down, Marcus stood by the window where he had faced Karen 3 months earlier. The coffee shop's new slogan gleamed in gold letters on the glass: "Brewing change, one cup at a time." Sarah approached with a fresh cup of his usual order, dark roast with a splash of almond milk. "Some things never change," she said with a smile, "but the important things have." Looking around at the gathered faces, Karen teaching Tommy how to properly stir his hot chocolate, David Chen discussing expansion plans with local business owners, and community members engaged in friendly conversation, Marcus realized that sometimes the worst moments can become catalysts for the best changes. The incident that could have divided their community had instead united it, creating ripples of positive change that continued to spread. It proved that with dignity, understanding, and a willingness to grow, even the most bitter conflicts could transform into something sweet, just like the perfect cup of coffee.